Welcome to This Prepared Life, a podcast for women where preparedness feels peaceful, practical, and possible. I'm Allison, and together we're building calmer, more resilient lives, one pantry shelf skill and intentional step at a time. Today, we are going to talk about the 5 factors that can impact your food storage. And if there is one thing I have just heard over and over again on Instagram and other social medias as I talk to you, it is that no one has the perfect space for food storage. We all battle something in our storage space, in our environment, and there are things that we can do to minimize the impact on our food storage so that we can have the most nutritionally dense food storage with the longest shelf life possible. So let's talk about some of those things today. In my food storage, where it is currently stored, humidity and moisture is the largest thing that I battle. We live in a 1927 farmhouse, and our food storage is in what I lovingly call creepy basement, and it is really moist down there. We have had professionals come in. We have looked into dehumidifiers, all of the things. And 1927 house, it's just going to be a humid space. It packaged everything that goes down in that basement to protect against moisture. But let's talk about the 5 factors that are going to impact your food storage the most. So the first factor that impacts your food storage is temperature, and temperature is one of the most important. The ideal temperature for storing food is a stable temperature between 40 and 70 degrees. Stable is more important than the actual temperature itself, because temperature fluctuations, if it's going up and down, can really drastically impact your food storage. The higher the temperature, the shorter the shelf life. As you look at the space available in your home that you can store food, think about throughout the day and throughout the seasons, how is this space impacted by temperature? Temperature and food they don't mix. When food is rapidly fluctuating or stored at high temperatures, it reduces the quality of the food, it reduces the nutritional content of the food on your shelves, and it reduces the shelf life. It's not going to store as long. As an example, powdered dairy products have a pretty good storage shelf life, depending on if they're non-fat or full fat. Full fat obviously stores for less time than a non-fat, but stored in warm temperatures, non-fat milk, which can last up to 10 years, can go rancid in as little as 3 months. That is, just one example of how drastically temperature can impact the shelf life of your stored food. So it's something you really want to be mindful of. I keep a thermometer in my storage space so I can just kind of watch it. Over the years, I really kind of have a mental picture of what creepy basement is going to do in the different seasons. And it really rarely gets above 60 down there, but there are some fluctuations. When it gets super warm, it tends to get more humid and just warm down there. So have a temperature in your storage space so that you can monitor what it's doing and protect your food if needed. One of the best things that you can do to minimize the impact of temperature on your food storage is to rotate the foods in your storage. Going back to that powdered milk as an example, if you are storing powdered milk or whatever the food is in a space that maybe doesn't have as ideal of a temperature as you would like, you just know that food is not going to last as long. It's not going to have the shelf life one would expect from it. So I need to rotate it sooner. And so monitoring rotation, having a spreadsheet where you can track that is really important because you really want to maximize your shelf life, maximize not wasting food, because then you are wasting your money, you are wasting your time, and you are wasting your energy. One of the questions I often get is, can I store food in my garage? Can I store food in my attic? Can I store food in an outdoor storage shed? And yes, technically you can. You can do anything that you would like to do, but should you? Probably not. Those spaces have very drastic temperature shifts. So unless you can climate control that space, like the garage, and keep it fairly steady, you're not going to want to store food in there. Do you have to have a perfectly climate controlled space to store food? Absolutely not. I do not. Most people I know do not. We don't all have endless money to dump into a climate controlled storage space or a bunker, things like that. You do the best you can with what you have. And in regards to temperature, that's rotation is your key factor and the key thing you can do to minimize the impact temperature has on your food storage. The next factor that I would like to talk about is oxygen. Oxygen is also incredibly important to the shelf life and the quality of your food in storage. Oxygen reacts with the vitamins and the other compounds in your food, and this is called oxidation. You will often see this in browning of food. You cut an apple and it turns brown, or meat starts going brown. That's one form of oxidation. Lipid oxidation is when fats start going rancid. So there's two kinds right there to look out for. How oxygen impacts your food is one, decreases the nutritional value. So food stored in non-airtight containers, you're going to have less vitamin content than food stored in an airtight container. It shortens its shelf life. Back to that powdered milk we talked to in temperature. If you have that same powdered milk and it's stored at a perfect temperature, but it's exposed to the air, it is going to have a really negative impact on that powdered milk. So keeping food, again, in airtight containers. And then oxygen, as it oxidizes food, it creates off flavors, odors, and rancidity. The rancid smell you will often smell in oils and flour, nuts, things that have an oil content to them. It is pretty unmistakable once you have smelled some off oil or off nuts. That food has started to oxidize and is either bad or on its way to going bad. Protecting food from oxygen is really simple, and the easiest way to do that is to store it in airtight packaging, whether that's glass jars and containers if it's on your pantry shelves, or keeping it in like the original packaging, which is usually sealed inside totes in your layer 2 pantry, or in your layer 3 pantry. Maybe you're using Mylar and oxygen absorbers to protect that food from oxygen. For your layer 3 pantry, just as a side note, I do not suggest storing bulk dry goods directly in the bucket because plastic is porous, and those buckets, while they are a fairly airtight container, over time, both moisture and air can seep into the bucket. So use Mylar to line the bucket for your layer 3 storage foods. The third factor that we are going to talk about is moisture. I don't think this one is going to be a surprise to any of you. When foods are moist, they mold, they grow bacteria, they go bad faster. Foods can pick up moisture from a lot of different places. The air, if you freeze dry food, you know that it is really susceptible to absorbing moisture, and so you have to keep that airtight. The packaging materials you use, if there was some water on your jar or your lid, that can introduce water to your food. Your hands, maybe you did a great job and you washed your hand before you're putting that food in the Mylar bag, but you had some water left or moisture left on your hand, and that is now introduced to the food. Also, sometimes the food itself isn't fully dry, whether you're getting it from the store or dehydrating it yourself. If that food isn't fully dry, even just one piece, it's going to impact all the food around it, and that moisture is going to spread through the entire bag or the jar, whatever the container is. One drop of water can ruin an entire batch of food. Be really careful that you're not introducing moisture to the food as you package it up for your long-term layer. I mentioned earlier that humidity is a huge problem for us in Creepy Basement. When we first moved to this house, I really wasn't aware of how much of a problem the humidity was in our basement. I had ordered a 5-gallon bag of buttermilk powder, and when I picked that up at my bulk order pickup, I brought that home and I didn't have time to package it right then, so I put it on this work table I had in the basement. Within 2 to 3 days, the next time I saw that buttermilk powder, it had absorbed all the moisture from the air and it was rock solid. It was just this big brick. And I was super disappointed because, it's 5 pounds of organic buttermilk powder. That was not a cheap mistake to make, but I learned, and now I obviously do not take any food down to Creepy Basement unless I have already packaged it or I'm storing it in some way before I package it where it's not going to absorb moisture from the air. That is just a little example from my life of when I made a mistake and didn't factor in moisture to my food storage. To minimize moisture in your food storage, use proper preservation techniques. If you're planning to store something long term, dehydrating, it needs to be brittle, like snap when you break it, not pleathery, leathery, and like bendy and pliable. Use proper packaging, proper handling, ensure that everything is dry. You can use desiccants when they're needed if you are concerned about moisture coming into your food. And you can also sometimes get dehumidifiers that will work in your room to reduce the humidity level there. The fourth factor that can impact your food storage is light. Most of us think sunlight when we hear light impacts your food storage, but also room light can impact your food storage. That's something to be mindful of. Light leads to oxidation, flavor changes, color changes, rancidity, nutrient loss. And in the case of sunlight, if it is streaming in on your packages of food, it can also increase the storage temperature of that package. Light is pretty unavoidable. We have to turn the lights on when we go into a room to see what we're doing. But some of the ways that you can minimize the impact of light on your food is, in the case of sunlight, hang curtains on windows or doors if there are windows and doors in your storage space. You can turn off the lights when you are not using the room so that the room lights are not shining on your jars of food. And you can also maybe keep things in storage bins if you needed to just give them a little extra protection from light, room light, or sunlight. And then rotating these foods as needed to ensure that they are coming in and out of your layer 2 or your kitchen pantry before light has had a chance to impact them. One example from my food storage where light has impacted food is freeze drying vegetables and storing those in glass jars. I will often freeze dry a large batch, and then some of it goes into Mylar for long-term storage and some of it goes into a glass jar because I'm going to use that in my layer 2 pantry or my kitchen and we're going to cook with it. Peas, broccoli, carrots, things like that. As the light is going through the glass jar onto the food, it changes the color. I have a jar of peas in the basement where they're white. The outside layer is all white, but if you flip it upside down and you can look at the bottom of the jar where it was not exposed to light, they're the pretty green color that they should be. So they're not necessarily bad. They just don't look as appetizing, but something to be mindful of if you are going to freeze dry, dehydrate, and store foods on your shelves. The fifth factor that can impact our home food storage are rodents and insects. And maybe that's factor 5 and factor 6, but I'm just going to combine them all together. There's 2 ways that rodents and insects can be introduced to our food. One is from the outside. Maybe rats or mice are coming into your house or coming into your basement, or insects are coming into, through holes in your house, wherever those happen to be. The other one is in the food itself. We all get grossed out when we hear this, but there can be insects and larvae and things like that in our food, in our grains. If you bring infested grains or a product into your kitchen or your pantry and it's not stored in an airtight container, let's say it has pantry moths in it. Those pantry moths are going to hatch, leave that container, and then go infest any other food that is surrounding it. And none of us want that. So keep your foods in airtight containers, even in your pantry if you're in an area where pantry moths are an issue. Food that has been impacted by mice or rodents should be thrown away. I know some people will talk about feeding it to their chickens, and you would need to look into that to see if that's something you feel safe and comfortable with. If it is infested or has been compromised by mice, rat, rodent droppings, please do not consume it. Insects in our food is it's a different story. If it's a minimal infestation, sometimes you can just scoop them out. You can definitely feed that to your chickens if you needed. Minimize insects, mice, rodents by using proper storage containers. That is a theme through all of these. It makes one thing you can do that helps almost all of these factors. Using airtight packaging, sealed containers, regularly inspecting not only your food, but your storage space. Are you keeping an eye out for signs of chewing or droppings or ants or insects coming into your space? Because it's not going to be long before they're in your food. Using oxygen absorbers is an excellent method to prevent larva insects, eggs that have come in from, wherever they were from the outside with your food storage. And it is far superior than freezing. Freezing is a great method also to kill insects, eggs in your food, but you have to do it on a cycle because it doesn't kill everything all at once. You have to freeze it, kill anything that's in there, bring it out, let it hatch, and then do it again, 7 to 14 days later, depending on what insect you were trying to kill. Oxygen absorbers, if used properly, have been known to reduce that immediately if you can keep it at the right level for the right length of time. Oxygen absorbers are far superior to freezing. Freezing also can introduce moisture to your food, so that's just something to be mindful of. Typically, if you let it sit out for 24 to 48 hours, it mitigates that. A sealed room, sealing your house, that's going to prevent rodents from coming in, using trap or baits as needed. Our food storage is a bank account, and it is an investment of our time, our energy, our money. So understanding the factors that can impact our food storage and doing what we can to minimize those and protect our investment is really important. My new book, Home Food Storage, is a great resource for more information on creating and using an emergency food supply. I'll put the link to my book in the description. Please leave a review. It helps more than you know. Thanks for being here.